Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Pratik and I'll be taking up the News Today discussion for 18th April. Let us start with the main headlines. So in the first news, we'll discuss NBA strengthening the implementation of BDA, that is Biological Diversity Act 2002. The second news is about 131st Constitutional Amendment Bill 2026 has been defeated in Lok Sabha. The third news is about Supreme Court has warned of strict action against illegal sand mining in the National Chambal Ghadial Sanctuary. In the fourth news, government has notified Bhavya scheme. And in the fifth news, River Basin Management RBM scheme has been extended for 5 more years. Apart from that, we also have certain quick updates. So let us start away with the first news, that is the National Biodiversity Authority has strengthened the implementation of Biological Diversity Act 2002. Now this topic is part of GS paper 3 environment, and to understand this topic holistically, we need to understand a couple of things. And the first thing that we need to understand is a mechanism called ABS, that is Access and Benefit Sharing Fund, right? So what exactly is ABS and what exactly is the reason why it has been used? So first thing that you need to know is that whenever any foreign officers or any company comes to India and utilize any genetic or generic products from India, it could be plant, it could be animal, or it could be any traditional knowledge. So when a foreign company or a foreign individual uses some of the Indian plants, animal, or any traditional knowledge, then and that results in profit for that company or for that individual, then they're supposed to pay back or share their profit with the community. And this mechanism under which they share some of the profit accrued from the resources that they have taken from India in terms of plants, animals, etc., for development of any drugs or for any process or anything. This has to be shared to the community. And it is a very noble idea, but it is not just limited to India. In fact, it is part of what is called as a UN Convention of CBD, that is Convention on Biodiversity under 1992. And this specific provision of access and benefit sharing came within the protocol that was known as Nagoya Protocol. So this appears very straightforward, but the problem is two things. First problem is that there is identification problem. And what is this identification problem? The problem is that how would the governance or governing authority would understand from which village or from which area that particular product has come from. So there is a problem of identification. Second is there is a problem of updation. So rarely this register under which various animals or plants usage is taken up by the various companies is updated. So there are two major issues. So now the recent development which has happened is that the NBA has strengthened this mechanism. Now how it has strengthened this mechanism? So what it has done is, it has done two things. It has first formulated a fund utilization mechanism under two categories: identifiable sources and unidentifiable origins. So when the sources is identified in a clearer manner, then the fund division is in this format, that 25 to 40% is given to the institutions which are managing the repository of the animal or product or the traditional knowledge. Right? So for them, the 25 to 40% will be given to them, and the variable or the variation is because of taking into mind the complexity that is inherent in doing this process. Then the rest amount is given or shared with the local communities within the state biodiversity board or the union territory Biodiversity Council. Now, you must be aware that the National Biodiversity Act, or the Biodiversity Act that India has passed, it has three layers. One is National Biodiversity Authority, which oversees the implementation at the national level, and it undertakes the permission for the foreign entities. Then you have state biodiversity boards, which take into account implementation at the state level, and also they look into the patent or the kind of resource utilization by Indian companies. And then the third level is the people's, at the local level, there is again an agency which look forward, or which talks about the sharing of resources with the community. So this 20 to 40% is basically being traveled or being transferred to the agencies which are at the local level, right? Then when there is unidentifiable origin. So first is very clear that when the identification is clear, then there is going to be this kind of sharing of the revenues. But when the origin of the resources is not identifiable in a clearer manner, or there is a lot of contestation, then again they have also provided a specific roadmap to address that particular issue. And within this, if resources are accessed from intermediaries or traders, the ABS, that is the access and benefit sharing, will be utilized directly for biodiversity conservation and management, right? So it will be done not for the communities, but it will be largely done for the overall biodiversity conservation. So this is the first aspect of the changes which has been made as per the implementation of the Biodiversity Act. The second major change that has been done is with respect to the repository guideline. So we had discussed earlier that there are two challenges. One is with respect to identification, and the second is with respect to updation. So this particular change is hitting the second aspect. So here the promotion of digital record is being enhanced, so that the updation can be done in a quicker way, and it will be able to access in a better way. Next, we have already discussed what is access and benefit sharing. Just understand that it is under Bonn Guidelines and Nagoya Protocol of 2010, and it is along with BDA, that is Biodiversity Act 2002, it is regulated by the ABS Regulation 2025. Now, with respect to this act, what exactly is the purpose of the Biological Diversity Act 2002? The purpose is to ensure conservation, knowledge, and also sustainable use, plus sharing of benefits from biological resources and associated knowledge to the local communities, right? So again, it has all these multiple objectives that are going on simultaneously. And it implements India's commitment that India had done under the CBD, that is Convention of Biological Diversities, that was signed in 1992, and this act came in 10 years later in 2002. And as we have discussed, it has three-tier mechanism. At the national level, it has National Biodiversity Authority, which has its headquarters in Chennai. Then it has State Biodiversity Board, SBBs, and then Biodiversity Management Committees, which are constructed at the local level. And largely, they are the ones which look into the management of the repository. SBBs are the one who talks about the sharing on access and benefit sharing, right? Okay, so what are the functions? They regulate access to biological resources and also associated knowledge, which is known as traditional knowledge, and ensures the ABS through mechanisms like royalties, technology transfer, etc. And it promotes conservation measures and documentation of traditional knowledge. Right, so this is all about the first news, and from this topic, UPSC asked a somewhat direct question, that is, how does biodiversity vary in India? This is a static part question where your understanding of the environment would be useful. So you can talk about how the biodiversity is very different because of the biogeographic region in India, including the Himalayas, including the Western Ghat, and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and also in the Indo-Burman region. So you can talk about that. You can also talk about the flora and fauna that is found there. And then how is the Biological Diversity Act helpful in conservation of flora and fauna? Here, you just need to talk about the structure, how it is structured, like what are the various levels under which it operates. And then you can talk about the functions, okay? Functions, its objectives that you can mention within this. Now, this particular topic can be indirectly used in terms of how what has been the recent developments with respect to the Biological Diversity Act to further improve its implementation. Okay. Now, the second news is again very important one, and this is about how the constitutional 131st Amendment Bill has been defeated in the Lok Sabha. And obviously, this is a topic which is from GS paper 2 polity. So here, if you look at the complete number, as of now, so this was a Constitutional Amendment Act. So Constitutional Amendment Bill, sorry, so any Constitutional Amendment Bill of this nature has to be passed under Article 368. And under Article 368, it is not the simple majority, but the majority required is special majority. So it requires special majority, which means for a bill, a constitutional amendment bill to be passed, it requires 2/3 members present and voting to vote in its favor, along with half of total strength. If you look at the number of people or the tally here, the number was close to 298 members voted in favor, okay, and close to 250 members or lesser than that voted against it. So obviously, the simple majority would be close to 272 around, right? Something around this number. And 548 members. So close to 272 would be the number, which, or 273 would be the number which would be required to get to pass this bill if it was a simple majority or simple bill, or it was an ordinary bill. But it was not an ordinary bill, it was a constitutional amendment bill. Therefore, it required a higher majority. So despite having more than 50%, it could not be passed because it did not meet the second requirement or the first requirement, that is 2/3 present and voting was not met, because here more than 300, somewhere around 320-30 votes were required here. So this was not able, the government was not able to muster that, and therefore this bill has been lapsed. Along with that, two more companion bills have also been lapsed. One is delimitation bill and the other one is the corresponding bill with respect to UTs. So it failed to secure the 2/3 majority, and following this defeat, the government has withdrawn the Delimitation Bill 2026 and the Union Territory Laws Amendment Bill. So we'll briefly discuss what exactly is the constitution or the composition of the content of these particular bills, and we'll also understand what exactly was the rationale given by the government. So according to the government, the rationale was very simple. So government said, we wanted what is called as one person, one vote, one value. So government essentially wanted to push this amendment for two reasons. One was to ensure that the foundational principle of political democracy was found. Now, where do we get the idea of political democracy? We get the idea of political democracy from the preamble of the Constitution. So the preamble to the Constitution of India says that we, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, seek to give to ourselves justice, social, economic, and political. So the part is that this is essentially part of our political justice. But the point is that we all know that because of the seat freeze after 1970, the 42nd Amendment Act, this has been limited. The seats have not commensurately added, increased, right? So it has meant that one state, the other state with different population continues to have the same amount of representation. So one state may be having a representation, same number of representation for 10 lakh, and the other one would be the same representation at 18 lakh, right? So it essentially destroys this whole idea of one person, one vote, one value. So government said that we wanted to correct that. The second thing that the government wanted to say is that they wanted to push forward the 106th Constitutional Amendment Act, which would give women reservation to 1/3 seats at two areas, Lok Sabha and State Legislative Assembly. So if you look at the data, At the Lok Sabha level, it is around 14%, 13 to 14% as of now, women's representation. And at the state legislative assembly, it is even worse. It is around less than 10% in various areas. So clearly, this was one of the major reason why government wanted to push forward this. Plus, at the same time, what government said that we will de-link this process. We will de-link this process from census. So delimitation will not be linked to census, and the distribution of seats and the increase of the government, the seats will be corresponding to a census of the previous one and not the present one. So these were the two arguments given by government. Now opposition had two major arguments. Opposition said first thing is that government is using the women reservation bill as a proxy to further strengthen its position by redrawal of boundary, right? So in a way, what opposition said that the speed with which government is bringing these bills, right, without having them pass through the parliamentary scrutiny or through parliamentary committee recommendations or etc., it signifies that something bad is happening, right? Some government is trying to consolidate its position through withdrawal of national boundaries. Now, so this is one thing that was there. So it was accused the government of political purpose. And second was, it said that the seats that would be increased will not be favoring the southern states, because the relative advantage or the relative gain of the delimitation process will result in higher seat or higher relative seat for the northern state and lower relative state seats for the southern states. So southern states will be at disadvantage. So these were the two arguments which the opposition said. In fact, this was a like 2-day marathon debate happened here, and government tried to persuade the opposition. All sorts of verbal assurances were given by the Prime Minister and the Home Minister and other speakers from the government side, but the opposition was very much united on this, and they were able to defeat the government on this particular thing. Now, what exactly were the major provisions of the 131st Amendment Act? So it primarily had or made three changes. First, under Article 81, the maximum limit of Lok Sabha seat is around 550 or 553 plus 7, so it is around 550. Now that number has to be increased to 850, right? So this change was done 543 to 850 seats in Lok Sabha, and within 850, 815 were to be given to the states and 35 to be UTs. The second change was with respect to Article 82. And what was done here? So here the third clause of Article 82 says that the delimitation or the census has to be linked with delimitation, which means that every time the population is updated, the same thing should also be reflected in the number or the delimitation part as well. It should also reflect in the number of seats that different states should get as a result of the census. But under this, the government has delinked census and delimitation, and what it has done is that the delimitation will be taken irrespective of the recent census, but it will be the census conducted after the year 2026. So in a way, government has said that the delimitation will not be limited with the census, but it will be decided by parliament by law. Now this was also one of the contentious issues which the opposition also was not in favor of. Right, so these were the major changes which was brought about by 131st Amendment Act. Apart from that, it also wanted to amend Article 334A, under which it allowed implementation of 1/3 of women's reservation in Lok Sabha and State Assembly immediately after delimitation and not waiting for the present census to be conducted, right? So right away this was to be done. And what about the delimitation bill? it tried to repeal and replace the Delimitation Act 2002. So remember that in our country, Delimitation Act or Delimitation Commission has been formed 4 times. So first time it was formed in 1970 or like 1951, then after 1961 election, in 1963, then after 1971 election. So after this 42nd amendment was passed, which froze the seat as per the 1971 census. Okay. And this was done to ensure that the southern state, which have been successful in family planning, do not get any disadvantage, right? So this was as per 42nd Amendment Act. It froze the seat for 25 years till 2001. Okay. It was passed in 1976 and 25, so it is 2001. Now in 2001, again it was frozen, the seat were frozen for 25 more year, and it was to be now changed after 2026, right? So you can see that only 4 times Delimitation Commission has been formed, right? So under 2001 Delimitation Act or the order which was made after the 2001 census, there were 2 things. So delimitation essentially involves 2 things. One is increase in number of seats, and the second is redrawal of boundaries. So this was not done in 2001, but this was done. Now, why redrawal of boundaries was done? This was done to ensure that the migration which followed, especially after 1991 urbanization process, because of that, the internal composition of the state was changed. That has to be reflected. Okay, so for example, earlier, if these 3 had similar kind of representation, for example, if this has 5 lakh population, this lakh 10 lakh, and this has 15 lakh, it has 1 seat, it has 2 seats, it has 3 seats. And now if the population change has happened, for example, this has become 10, this has become 30, this has become 60. So more seats have to be given towards this side, right? So this internal change was allowed under 2001. So this was the internal change that happened. Then it specified that the delimitation would be based on the latest published census at the time of the commission's formation, meaning the 2011 census would be used. So this is a very important development, because now the delimitation will not be linked with the one which is forming at the right at this formation of the delimitation, but it would be before, at the time of the commission's formation, which means that 2011 census would be used. Then it would be headed by the delimitation chaired by a person who is or has been a judge of the Supreme Court. So if you look at the nature of the Delimitation Commission, is it a constitutional body or a statutory body? So even though the function of Delimitation Commission is mentioned under Article 82, it is still a statutory body because it has been formed as a result of a statute or a law. Right? So remember that Delimitation Commission is not a constitutional body, but it is a statutory body. Then the UT Laws Amendment Bill extended the similar changes to Delhi, Puducherry and Jammu and Kashmir. Now this is some details about constitutional amendment process under Article 368. So it can be introduced in either house of the parliament. It could be under Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, doesn't matter. Then it is required to be passed by a majority of total membership so half of the total strength and 2/3 majority of the members present and voting. And lastly, it also requires state ratification in case the amendment affects the federal provision, right? From at least half of the state. From this topic, UPSC had asked this question in 2024, how many delimitation commissions have been constituted by the government of India till December 2023? I hope all of you would be able to answer this now. Next question is, Supreme Court warns of strict action against illegal sand mining in the National Chambal Ghadial Sanctuary, right? So this is a topic from GS paper 3 Environment. And understand that a lot of events or context have happened till the time Supreme Court had to take the decision on its own matter. So this matter has been taken up by Supreme Court under suo motu, right? And some of the forest officers have been killed by the illegal sand miners, right? One in the district Morena in Madhya Pradesh and the other one in Dholpur district of Rajasthan. Apart from that, there has been photos and videos which shows that so much illegal sand mining has been happening despite Supreme Court's intervention in this regard. And Supreme Court has also admonished the state government, in fact, the state government of UP, Rajasthan and MP, because the Chambal sanctuary falls in the tri-junction of these three states. They have not been able to implement the guidelines for regulating the sand mining in the particular state. They have said that the forest officials are not able to withstand the power and the kind of resources that illegal sand miners are using, right? So as a response of that, Supreme Court has said that they should be installing CCTV cameras so that the movement can be tracked, GPS should be used. So it has admonished the state government and asked them to take their work very seriously. So this is the extent of problem, right? So we need to understand, first of all, as a structural question, why exactly is the illegal sand mining happening in India? What could be the factors responsible for that? And the first reason why this is happening is because there is a tremendous demand for construction of not just houses, but also for all the urban amenities because of the rampant urbanization in the country, right? Because of that, there is requirement for consumption and construction, and sand is the second most consumed resource after water due to rapid urbanization. The second important reason is because there is preference for river sand. The artificial modern alternative M sand which is used is not that good for binding the concrete, and the construction workers and the engineers prefer the river sand because it is ideal for binding the concrete. Then there is also problem with respect to regulation because sand is a minor mineral under the Mines and Minerals Regulation Act 1957. So what is the significance of that? The significance is that because it is a minor mineral, it is under the state government. And because it is under state governments, what happens is that there is problem in uniformity of regulation. And because of that, there is very limited control of the national government. Next, there's also issues with monitoring challenges because these sand places or these sand areas are at very remote places. And there is also the political criminal nexus that is basically seen here, and along with high level of corruption, right? And highly organized sand mafia which have access to a lot of resources. So these are the reasons which contribute to the illegal sand mining in India. Now, what could be the potential impact of illegal sand mining in India? So it can be discussed under three categories. One is with respect to environmental reasons. So because of this, it changes the river morphology because it leads to bank collapse, scouring and river erosion. Secondly, it also leads to decline in the water quality because it mobilizes chemical pollutants such as heavy metals and phosphate. Thirdly, it also creates issues with biodiversity and habitat loss. It disrupts fish breeding and migration. In fact, the ghadials which are found in Chambal, they can only lay eggs in the sand. And if the sand is disrupted, then definitely it's going to have an impact on the population, on the crocodiles or the ghadials. Then it also reduces the flood regulation capacity. It makes them more vulnerable to storms, cyclones and tsunamis. So it leads to disaster as well. Secondly, there is also problem with the public infrastructure because of the rampant illegal sand mining. It destabilizes the critical engineering structures such as bridges, pipelines, site protection walls, etc. And lastly, it also creates economic challenges because it leads to loss of state exchequer, because illegal mining leads to loss of royalty payments, taxes and environmental fees. Now, way ahead, we can talk about what the Supreme Court has said. We need to require CCTV cameras, GPS tracking, and more than that, we also need interagency coordination, and we need to ensure that these illegality is taken with a very strict iron hand, right? So what about National Chambal Ghadial Sanctuary? So it is a protected area established in 1917. It is the only riverine protected area which is near the tri-point, or it is at the tri-junction of three states, that is Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. What are the important species that it has? It has ghadial. Now it is very important that you know that it is a critically endangered species. Then you have crocodiles, red-crowned roofed turtle, Ganges river dolphin. All of these species are very important here. Now from this, UPSC had asked a question, a related question, that is coastal sand mining, whether legal or illegal, poses one of the biggest threats to our environment. Analyze the impact of sand mining along the Indian coast, citing specific examples. So UPSC has asked a question on coastal sand mining. Now this article was about riverine sand mining, but the effect that we had discussed, more or less, they will be same with respect to coastal mining as well. Okay. Next topic is government has notified a scheme which is called as Bhavya scheme, that is Bharat Audyogik Vikas Yojana. And this is part of GS paper 3 economy, right? So what exactly is this scheme all about? What is the context of this scheme? So understand this, in India, despite several provisions giving so many incentives to the private sector, the industrial contribution or the manufacturing contribution in India continues to be very low. This despite the fact that China is losing its dominance and other countries have started with China plus one strategy. Most of the benefits have gone to the Southeast Asian. So we need to reflect what is going wrong in India's policies. So one of the largest challenges which the government, which the private players have said with respect to industrial policy is the problem of land acquisition. So it is very difficult to acquire land in India. Then there is problem of bureaucratic delays in granting licenses. Then there's a problem with respect to environmental clearances. Then again, if all these things are also done, then what happens is that there is problem with respect to utilities. So the companies have to run from pillar to post to get basic utilities like electricity, water supply, etc. Now, as a response to that, government has used a different approach, which is Bhavya scheme. So what is this? Some basic detail. So it is under Ministry of Commerce and Industry via DPIIT. And its objective is to develop 100 investment-ready plug-and-play industrial parks. So now this is the most important word, plug and play. What is plug and play? So whatever challenges that I just discussed, this has been taken up or taken care of by using plug and play parks. So what it does, it is ready to use manufacturing site. So all the issues like land acquisition, environmental clearances, bureaucratic coordination, utilities formation, everything is taken care by the government, and they just provide you with plug and play park where the companies can go directly start, and they can start production or they can start operating from day one. Okay, so it has pre-built infrastructure such as roads, power, water, approvals, enabling immediate operational setup. So it is a very profound paradigm shift as far as the industrial or manufacturing sector is concerned, right? So it has been given for duration of 6 years from 2026-27 to 2031-32 with an outlay of 33,660 crores. And there are certain features of this scheme, that is, what is the mode of implementation? So there's a sponsoring agency by the central or the UT government or the central PSU. Then there is a special purpose vehicle which is formed between the National Industrial Corridor Development and Implementation Trust, that is NICDIT, and under DPIIT. So this is a body that is created under DPIIT and the state nodal agency. Then financial support, funding up to rupees 1 crore per acre in equity mode shall be provided for each project. And this will be for core infrastructure, for value added infrastructure, for social infrastructure. So this is again very important thing, that this project development will also cater to the housing of worker as well. So it will also have social infrastructure as well. Then additional support up to 25% of the project cost for external infrastructure will also be provided for the last mile connectivity. Now, this is important from the perspective of mains. What is the significance of Bhavya scheme? So first thing is definitely it will lead to ease of doing business because of the plug and play model, right? Secondly, it will lead to employment generation, both direct and indirect generation, plus because of the social infrastructure, it will also lead to better living conditions. Then it will also promote regional industrial growth, and it will enable sustainable and future ready industrial park because it is aligned with other projects such as PM Gati Shakti for multimodal connectivity, focus on green energy, etc. Right, let's talk about the next news, which is River Basin Management Scheme extended for 5 more years. And this is again part of environment. So what has been done is that this scheme was launched in 2014 as a central sector scheme. So this is a central sector scheme, which means that the entire financial burden or outlay will be provided by the central government. And it is administered by Department of Water Resources, River Development and Ganga Rejuvenation under Ministry of Jal Shakti. Now, what are the objectives of the River Basin Management Scheme? So first is about sustainable use of water resources across river basins. Okay. Second is to promote development of surface water and the groundwater. So both surface water and groundwater resource development. Third, it is also supposed to take surveys, investigation and preparation of basic master plans. Fourth, it will also, based on the survey that it takes, it will also provide planning of irrigation, hydropower and multi-purpose projects. And lastly, it will support integrated development of water resources for multiple uses, including navigation. In fact, one of the objective is also to promote interlinking of rivers. Next, what is the geographical scope? So it is largely focusing on the strategic areas where India shares border with certain hostile neighbors, not hostile, but some neighbors such as Pakistan, China, and even Bangladesh, right? For example, these rivers are especially in the northeastern region and the Indus Basin in Jammu and Kashmir / Ladakh region. And as per the institutional structure, it has two structures, two broad components. First is the Brahmaputra Board. And what is the role of Brahmaputra Board? It is to plan at the basin level, not at the river level, but at the basin level planning and flood management in the northeastern region. And the second will be Investigation of Water Resources Development Scheme, that is IWRDS. It will implemented through two things. One would be Central Water Commission to undertake surveys, investigation, preparation of DPRs, that is detailed project reports for water resources. And then second is National Water Development Agencies. It focuses on water resource planning at the national level, particularly under the interlinking of rivers. So again, we have understood that how it will be implemented. Now, what are the key areas of action under our RBM scheme? First is basin planning, right? So we have discussed that this is about basin planning. It's about the area which the river drains and not just about the siloed approach, right? So it creates and updates long-term master plans to guide the conservation. Second is it also wants to ensure flood and erosion management, particularly in the northeastern region. And third, it's about drainage development to ensure improved water flow in waterlogged areas to boost productivity in both rural and urban areas. And community-based intervention is also one of the major action plan under RBM scheme. Now let's talk about the quick updates. So first is about relief scheme, that is resilient and logistics intervention for export facilitation. Again, here just understand that when the West Asian crisis happened, especially the US-Iran war broke out, then a lot of the investors in India, especially the SMEs, the small and marginal or the medium enterprises in India, were facing a lot of challenges, right? With respect to the hike in insurance cost, with respect to all other premiums, war-related export risk. So as a respite, government had provided us a scheme called Relief Scheme. Now this scheme has been extended, and it has also been extended to countries like Egypt and Jordan, right? So it is a time-bound intervention under the Export Promotion Mission. It helps Indian exporters deal with high freight costs high rising insurance premium, and war-related risk. Now, what is the implementation agency? It is ECGC, right? Wholly owned by Government of India under Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So the key feature is that it is largely based on MSME, and secondly, it covers the export cycle, right? For end-to-end support for shipment, planning, insurance, etc. So this is more than sufficient for the prelims and mains purpose. The second is about nominated members. Now, why this concept was in news? Because recently, for the first time, a nominated member was selected or elected as the deputy chairman of the Rajya Sabha for the third consecutive term in India. Now, deputy chairman of Rajya Sabha is it is mentioned under Article 89 of the Constitution, and it is elected by the Rajya Sabha itself from amongst its member, right? So it's an elected body, and it is elected by the members of the Rajya Sabha themselves. And the deputy chairman, what exactly they perform? They perform the duty of the chairman's office when it is vacant or when the vice president is acting as president. Now, what are the whole idea behind the nominated members? So it is mentioned under Article 80 of the Constitution. So Rajya Sabha can have up to 250 members, including 12 nominated members, which are nominated by the president on advice of the Council of Ministers from 4 areas which is mentioned, such as literature, art, science, and social services, right? And what are the powers and functions? They can participate in debates and discussion. They cannot vote in presidential election. Remember that. They can only vote in the vice presidential election, but not in the presidential election, because here only the elected members are eligible. Then they can join a political party within 6 months of taking a seat, but not after 6 months, because then they will come under the purview of anti-defection under the 10th schedule of the Constitution. So far, no nominated member has been part of the Council of Ministers. Again, very important development with respect to the nominated member and the office of the Deputy Chairman of Rajya Sabha. Next topic is about Scarborough Shoal, which was in news because China has deployed ships and barriers to block the disputed South China Sea Scarborough Shoal. So Scarborough Shoal can be considered as an example of an island-like structure which is very close to Philippines. In fact, it is part of the Philippines exclusive economic zone, because as we all know, as per UN clause, the exclusive economic zone is about 200 nautical miles from the coast of a territory, and here it is around 120 nautical miles. So as per international tribunal as well, this territory was said to be under Philippines, right? But China has been insisting on acquiring this territory, and recently China has started a project which is about conserving some natural resources or natural relief something, right? And it is using this as a pretext to further build pressure here. And a lot of scholars have been calling this as an example of what China follows, a strategy called salami slicing, right? So let's talk about what is Scarborough Shoal. So it is a disputed atoll in the SCS, that is South China Sea, claimed by both China and the Philippines as part of their territory. And what is the strategic importance? It is located along major sea lanes with rich fishing grounds and potential resources. Even the rare earth elements is suspected to be here. Then other disputed islands, you can see Spratlys Island and Parasil Island is also very disputed here. Now, these disputed regions can become very important part of your prelims. Next is about phytoremediation. Again, this is a very simple concept, but what happened was in one of the depot in Ahmedabad called Kankaria Coaching Depot, it has become India's first water neutral railway facility, which means that it has conserved water by treating and reusing its wastewater using a technique called as phytoremediation. So phytoremediation is essentially part of bioremediation, which means that when water is treated using some biological agent, then it is called as bioremediation. And when it is done using some plants-based remediation, it is called as phytoremediation. Okay, so it is sustainable, it is eco-friendly, and some of the examples are water hyacinth, duckweed, and water lettuce, which can be used as phyto for phytoremediation. And bioremediation can be either in situ, matlab, which is where the treatment occurs directly at the contaminated site. And example of this is bioventing and bioaugmentation. Then you have out or ex situ, where contamination material is excavated or pumped for treatment somewhere else. An example of ex situ bioremediation would be land farming or bioreactors. Again, very important from prelims perspective. Next is mesothermic fishes. Now, mesothermic, according to some recent reports, the mesothermic fishes are under decline because of two important reasons. One is that the ocean surface is rapidly rising in temperature. So this is making its survival very difficult. So there is habitat loss. The second thing is that they are also facing what is called as prey loss, because they are not able to have this kind, the prey base has substantially reduced in that region. So what exactly are mesothermic fishes? So they can retain metabolic heat and keep parts of their bodies warmer than the surrounding seawater. So they can regulate their internal temperature. Examples are great white shark and tunas. Other types of fishes, ectothermic fishes, they are cold-blooded creatures comprising the vast majority of fish species that rely on their surrounding. So ectothermic are cold-blooded creatures. Most of the fishes are ectothermic. Then there are endothermic fishes. They are warm-blooded fishes which are able to metabolically control their body temperature. So mesothermic and endothermic are relatively closer. Next is about bauxite. And this resource was a flashpoint for a major conflict that happened between Odisha's Raigad district, between the tribal population and between the authorities. And it was because of the construction of a 3-kilometer road to a bauxite mine called Sijmali, right? So Sijmali bauxite mine was, the road was to be constructed, and because the tribal population was not in favor of that, therefore clash happened there. Now the conflict is part of the broader Mali protection movement, and local tribe communities have alleged that the Gram Sabha consent, so there is a provision under several laws that the Gram Sabha consent have to be taken before taking up certain minerals, right? So they say that their consent was not taken up and the mining project have been given to private players. So as of now, Vedanta is operating here. So they have been protesting against Vedanta. Okay, so we need to understand about bauxite because resources are very important, critical part of our prelim syllabus. So bauxite is an ore of aluminium that contains hydrated aluminium oxide as the main constituent and iron oxide, silica and titania as minor constituents. So where is bauxite found in India? So it is mostly found in Odisha. So Odisha has as much as 41%, followed by Chhattisgarh, which is 20%, Andhra Pradesh 12%, Gujarat 8%, and Jharkhand 6%. Again, you don't need to know the composition, but maybe just remember one or two, top 2-3 would be good enough. Then with respect to the countries, so Australia is the top bauxite producing nation, followed by Guinea, China, Brazil, and India. So India is the 5th largest producer of bauxite. Next news is about dung beetle. So here again, interestingly, what the research has showed that the dung beetles can navigate via the Milky Way. What is Milky Way? It is essentially the galaxy of which the solar system is part of. So what has been observed via the research is that the dung beetle. So what are dung beetles? So they are terrestrial insects, which means that they are found on the land and they feed on the feces of the large herbivores or dung. So they basically feed on the dung. That is why they are called as dung beetle. And they navigate through at night using the Milky Way, moving in straight lines while rolling the dung balls, right? So essentially, if you look at them, it seems that they are using a Google map, but their Google map is nothing but Milky Way because they somehow rely on the polarized light pattern. So they are able to use that polarized light pattern and the diffuse glow of the night sky. So they do not rely on a specific star, but they rely on the diffused night sky. And based on that, they can travel in straight line. Next news is about NMEDT, that is National Mineral Exploration and Development Trust. Again, just you need to know is that the Parliamentary Standing Committee has flagged that there are critical gaps in the functioning of this particular body. So just we need to know what is the composition of this body, what exactly are the function. So what it is a statutory trust, right? Which means that it has been created as an act and to boost what mineral exploration in India, especially for deep-seated and critical minerals. It has been established under Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act 1957. Objective we have discussed to accelerate and strengthen the mineral exploration, and the funding is, it levies equivalent to 3% of the royalty paid by the holders of the mining leases. And what are the governance structure? It is headed by the Union Minister of Mines, and it is headed by Secretary, Ministry of Mines, as part of the Executive Committee. The last news for the day is about hanging glaciers. And as per several report or a new research published by a group of IITs and IISc, Indian Institute of Science, they have identified as many as 219 hanging glacier in Uttarakhand's Alaknanda Basin. Now, this creates a lot of challenge because once you understand what hanging glacier is, it poses a lot of threat with respect to disaster, with respect to accidents, etc. So what is a hanging glacier? It is a glacier that terminates at the edge of a cliff. So largely the glaciers generally end at the toe or at the valley floor. But here it doesn't end to the end of the valley floor, but it terminates somewhere before that. So towards the cliff they are ending. So as part of that, when the glacial melting happens because of climate change, it is going to, or it is likely to cause some sort of, it will feed the ice below primarily through the ice falls, and it can lead to avalanches. And it can also create a lot, they are potential hazard as well, because they are inherently stable, because they are hanging from the valleys, and they may produce catastrophic break-off events, hit glacial lakes, and they can trigger GLOFs or block rivers as well. So they can cause a lot of potential damage. So we need to make sure something has to be done for this hanging glacier. So this is all about today's news today. I hope this was useful. Thank you and all the best.